Hey, this is Albert Abramson, writer. Some of you guys may have hired me at some point, but for writing, I've been writing for since I was a kid. It's only been in the last 10 years or so that I've found out that I can make money doing it. I always just did it as a hobby, and when I'm not playing, computer games, Boom Beach or something, I'm writing. So I do it for fun, and I've done at least a couple hundred paid projects over the years writing news stories and articles. I'm seeing a lot of advice given, and some of it's from professional writers. They're using their style. Everyone has their own style. Um, uh, some short stories, screenplays is what I'm going to focus mainly on. Um, Most of what I've seen is they're saying that structure is so important, but I'm seeing other writers say that structure is not important at all. I'm going to say that structure is not important at all. And the reason is I'm seeing some people writing their feature-length screenplays. They use a 3-act structure as the traditional one. Some use 6, some use 12, some use 13. But most of the discussions and most of the learning out there is based on the 3-act structure, which is Act 1 is about a half hour of setup for your feature-length film. Then you have the 1 hour middle part, which usually has 6 subparts or 6 sub-stories built in. And then Act 3 is another 30 minutes, so you get a 2-hour movie out of this. And it's usually about 120 pages. Remember, officially it's 120 pages. It's 1 minute per page, so your screenplays are supposed to be 120 pages, and now Hollywood's trying to cut them down to 105. But I think that's a mistake. I've seen movies that are, Star Trek V. It's not a great film. They really tried. It was a high concept film, going to meet God at the center of the galaxy. And I think with the writer's strike and everything else going on, even a great director, experienced director, I think would have had a hard time pulling that off with all the problems that they ran into, and then Paramount cutting their special effects budget from $4 million to $2 million right as they were starting to do shooting. So some of the special effects, usually a strong point in the Star Trek movies, but that's another story. So I had a good time when I first saw that movie, Star Trek V, in the theater. Remember, I was 10 years old, and everybody told me how terrible it was. And once everybody told me how terrible it was, I decided to go see the movie again. Matinee, of course. I'm not going to spend full price when everybody's telling me the movie's bad. And the second time I saw it, I saw all the flaws. And then I was reminded about the ending of the movie, which I hated, which is, again, Paramount didn't like the idea of there being God in a movie, and they didn't want any religious themes. Never mind, the entire Star Wars trilogy is about religious themes, light side versus the dark side. But some storytellers can hack it and some can't. So a lot of them are going to 6-act structure, 12, 13. I've seen 21, 24. And really what those are little sub-stories. So you usually have, or mini stories, subplots, mini plots. And usually it's the protagonist. Think of it as a high-speed action film. You have 7 to 10 pages or 7 to 10 minutes of 7 minutes of a high-speed chase. And then you get done with your high-speed chase and you have your 7-minute love scene, whatever. I don't know how many these older guys in Hollywood can last 7 minutes. It's doubtful, but I'm sure they use camera tricks and editing tricks and whatnot. But it's 7 minutes for that scene. Then they have 7 minutes for comedy. Then they have 7 minutes for some other little mini quest, a little MacGuffin quest. Remember, MacGuffin is where you have what Hitchcock called it, the MacGuffin. It's the object that no one in the audience cares about. Who the heck cares whatever that item is? Or if you saw episode 9, it was one MacGuffin quest after another, and it got old really fast. You expect in a Star Wars movie that they're going to go after one item, and in episode 9, I think they went after 4 or 5. And it was a little spaghetti western. If you've seen the spaghetti westerns where they, run from the ranch to the river. The river, they say, they jump on their horses and they say, we got to get to this other location. So they go to the other location, the forest or something, or the train stop. And from the train stop, oh no, we need to get to the river. So they all get on their horses and they go to the river real quick, and then they run back into town and they do this little, do a whole 2-hour movie that way. I don't agree with the idea that a feature-length film is exactly 2 hours, and I certainly don't agree with compressing it down to 85 minutes. In fact, Star Trek V was, I think, 89 minutes, and boy, that felt like a long story. It just felt like a long movie. The second time I saw it, I remember feeling like felt like it was pushing 3 hours. And I got out and I looked at the time on my watch. As a kid, it was when I first had a watch. Again, I must have been 10 years old, and it was I was amazed that only about an hour and a half had passed. But I've seen movies that go 2.5 hours and they feel like you're just in and out. And they don't tell very much. They just run really, really fast, and it's a lot of new things happening all the time. But I think those movies that feel shorter are more fun. Sitcoms and other serial shows, 30 minutes is allotted, but you actually get 22 minutes of actual show, sometimes 21. So using the 1 page per minute rule, they've done some studies on this. It's not really 1 page per minute. You can get as much as 1.5 pages done in a minute. So their study, the people tried to sell screenplays that were 140 or 150 pages, and they couldn't sell them. And they showed that the screenplay ran really, really fast. And you'd have to adjust your margins to get it down to 120 pages. A lot of Hollywood studios don't want to do anything over 2 hours because it's a big risk. It's actually not a big risk. All the highest grossing films are longer films, 2.5, 3 hour films. That's another story. Some of these 90 and 95 minute films feel like they drag on forever, and some of the longer films feel like they go really quick. It depends on what's happening. Malcolm X was 3 hours, and so was Dances with Wolves. Got out of Dances with Wolves, and I didn't realize it was a 3 hour film. I had no idea. Just Kevin Costner is a very good director when he has a good story. But sitcoms, so Act 1 is usually the first 1/4, but sitcoms and other situation shows, half-hour shows, they don't have to spend much time. They can spend as little as a minute setting things up, and sometimes they just have 1 or 2 lines, and they're real clever about it. So it depends on what you're writing. Most of my sitcoms that I write, I've written a pilot, I've written a couple of pilots, I've written a spec script, and I keep them at about 30 to 36 pages. I've got some at 27. And I'll turn on the computer and just let it read the entire thing through, and I get them done in 26 minutes, and that's with the long, slow narrations. But it is about, it's 52 lines, I think, in a standard screenplay format, which is literally about 1 second per line. It is about 1 minute per page. But it depends on how you write it. Some people try to just compact everything down, and they think they're saving paper, and maybe they'll fool somebody, but somebody's going to read through that script at some point, and they're going to read it out loud, and they're going to do the reading, and they're going to be like sitting there with their stopwatch, and it's going to hit like 35 minutes. So keep it at 21, 22 minutes if you're doing TV pilot. Act 2, that is, there's a lot of books out there about what is an act. And the 3-act structure we've followed since the days of Shakespeare, and for monetary reasons, TV shows are being broken up into 4 or 5 acts to squeeze more commercial time in. And shorter commercial breaks make more money, so you have to take your 7 minutes of commercials and you have to subdivide it into smaller and smaller bits, and a lot of companies want to go for the short ads because they just want to say, hey, this product's coming out, go buy it. So when you're selling soap, but in any story, even if it's a book, there's a point of no return. And it's usually after Act 1 is setting up your daily humdrum structure, your commute, you start for school, it's the same thing every day, and then you establish about halfway through Act 1, there's a change. Something has happened. Back to the Future, one of the great things about that movie is they delete that first half of Act 1 so they can go into the second half of Act 1, and you see the change right away, the very first day. You don't spend any time at all setting that up, because if they figured out in the second half of Act 1 you can establish everything. And I've written stories with no Act 1. I've taken whole feature-length film stories and I've compacted it down to as little as 10 pages, and just using clothing, symbolism, colors, and dialogue. You want to use dialogue as minimally as possible, but when you are using dialogue, make it work. All of Quentin Tarantino's films, they'll be talking about one thing and really the scene is about something else. But every line of dialogue in every Quentin Tarantino film you've ever seen, from Reservoir Dogs to Pulp Fiction and Jackie Brown, it's all the same. If there's a line of dialogue there, it's important. It does something. And with Quentin Tarantino, sometimes it does 2 or 3 things. But Act 2 starts with that point of no return. Point of no return is not something internal. It's something external that happens to the character in Act 1. And in Act 1, the character responds usually like the hero's journey, the 7 story types. There are actually a lot of story types. They don't count revenge. They don't count 7 story types. Don't count a lot of stories. In fact, most movies and most stories don't follow that. If they do, they kind of follow the quest or the voyage and return. A few do the rags to riches story, but the vast majority of stories I see out there don't follow that at all. There's also an argument that I just saw made on a video today where they say that every single story, to be a story, every single one, the main character changes. And I'd like to believe that that's not true either. If you look at all the James Bond films and a lot of the action movies, the good ones, the well thought out ones, the character from the very beginning is just very malleable, in the sense that he's very adaptable to the current situation, but his character doesn't change. His personality doesn't change. The Fast and Furious films, characters will change a little bit. Most of the James Bond films, most of the action films, and most of the Arnold Schwarzenegger, Sylvester Stallone action films, the character is just very adaptable to the situation to begin with. So when there's a danger, they respond. They figure out how to get out of that. And I think that by the way, before I forget this, every story I've ever seen always comes down to 2 basic ideas. That the main character is either forced to choose between 2 bad choices, or they get to choose between 2 good choices. Take Brewster's Millions, where he can spend $30 million in 30 days in order to try to get the $300 million, or he can take the easy way out and he just gets a little $1 million inheritance. So Brewster's Millions is officially rags to riches story, but that one's about choice also. What makes stories, a synonym for story, is a dilemma or a crisis. And you're telling people about what happened in the past usually. And you're telling people a story. Think gathered around a campfire. And this is something instinctive that human beings have, that we need stories as a way to communicate lessons. Gathered around a campfire, and you're confronted by the cave bear. The overcoming the monster is one of the 7 story types. I use the cave bear. And the clan confronts the cave bear. And the cave bear turns out to be way too tough, and he kills one of the cavemen, and the cavemen have to go back to their tribe where the family is, and based on their different 3-4 different personality types, which are symbolically represented by 3-4 different characters, each one is advocating for something. Because when you're watching a story, watching a movie, listening to a story, you don't want to hear, this person's pushing for this, but they really mean that. they're pushing for two ideas. If you have two different ideas, you have to have two different characters advocating for them. A lot of production companies want to cut the number of characters down to the absolute minimum. But if you think about Star Wars, Star Trek, uh, most of the sci-fi movies, most of your action movies, the things that have been successful over time, they have 5, 6, 7 lead characters. Sometimes they have 10, sometimes they have 11. And each time they have a new idea, a new way to confront, say, the Borg or the Death Star or whatever the impending doom is, they have to have another character present a different way of attacking the bad guys, surviving. Do you escape? Do you capture something? Do you shut something down? Do you try to outrun them? Do you try to invade? Do you join? Do you surrender? C-3PO always advocates for surrender. Nobody listens to him, thank goodness, because that'd be a boring movie. And we know from what Darth Vader says, we have that little inside view. We know that, of course, they'd all get blasted, except for Luke Skywalker in that particular case. But there's a point of no return. What is Act 2? Act 2 starts with the point of no return. Now you've entered this kind of whole other world. If you know the hero's journey, you descend into the underworld or something, and your mentor teaches you how to deal with this whole new world, and the character changes or adapts to deal with it, and they kind of climb out of the pit. And that's, that's another way to tell a story. Comedy and horror, timing is everything. It's just like musicals, dance productions, timing is everything. Even when I starred in Grease the musical, and I played one of the characters, and I had a good time doing it. One of the things that the director and the music director and the choreographer and the other actors imparted into me, what I remember very distinctly, is how important the timing was. I'd always done drama. I'd done Shakespeare. I'd done, you have iambic pentameter in Shakespeare, but it's usually really brief. Almost all the theater and acting that I'd done was dramatic or maybe romantic comedy. The independent films that I'd done, all my stage time until that time had been about using your time, conveying meaning with time and delays and whatnot. But comedy, horror, and musicals are very, very dependent on timing, even when you're not in that mode. If you see one of the greatest horror movies, even if you don't like horror movies, is Alien. Watch the movie Alien until you have to just, hit the pause button and turn it off, because it eventually gets too scary for you. I've turned that movie off many times because it'd be like 1 o'clock in the morning. I'm trying to get to sleep. Especially the Dallas scene where the alien pops out and just grabs him. It's just extremely terrifying. But watch the timing. Ridley Scott is a brilliant director, and he does a terrific job building up in the Nostromo. It's not just all the weird creaky sounds in the ship, but it's a completely otherworldly environment that you're not used to. And Act 1 is about 25 minutes before they finally land. They get to the point of no return. Of course, what's the point of no return in Alien? That's when they're down there inside the alien ship. The point of no return, the external thing that happens to them, is the facehugger jumps out and attaches itself to the guy's face. And of course, there's no turning back at that point. You're stuck with a facehugger. And that's true for almost every good movie. Is there's a point of no return. Whether it's 4 weddings and a funeral, whether it's about getting married, the point where you are in a wedding, or the point where you are in the process where the guy asks the question. If the woman says yes, that's kind of, it's not impossible, but it's really, really hard to back out. But most other types of stories, the timing isn't everything, and you can play around a little with the time. Comedy, horror, and musicals, the timing controls everything that you say and do, and you even have to edit your lines quite a bit to get the kind of iambic pentameter, get things kind of moving along, which I need to do. I'm at 19 minutes already. Comedy and horror, timing is so important because there's a kind of a natural rhythm that we have inside us. You're no longer around the campfire telling the story. Comedy, horror, and musicals, you're there, in the moment. It's one of the things that kind of brings you in. They bring you into the musical, and you feel like you're part of it, and you're singing along, and it's something that's very present tense. And it's one of the things that I love about those three genres. Sorry, I'm running behind. List of top grossing comedies. Just want to run some of them off. Incredibles 2, Minions, Despicable Me 2 and 3, Shrek 1 and 2 and 3, Deadpool 1 and 2, Secret Life of Pets, Shrek Forever, Madagascar 1, 2 and 3, Tangled, Men in Black 1, 2 and 3, Hangover, Cars 1 and 2, Ted, Simpsons movie, Home Alone 1 and 2. What you notice, of course, is it's a lot of animated films and a lot of family-friendly films. It's hard to make a family-friendly film that's drama, tension, action, adventure, horror, of course, because those depend on building the tension. Films like Pulp Fiction and films like Alien and Aliens, it spend a lot of time building the tension. Inglourious Bastards, where the Nazis open up by killing the whole family of Jews in this really tragic opening scene, to demonstrate that the bad guy is really the bad guy. Those types of stories, and you have to decide this first and foremost, is it family friendly or not? Top grossing films, of course, are family friendly. Anytime you have people increasing or decreasing the population, that's generally not family friendly, because you have themes that parents don't want to bring their kids in. It's a big difference having one customer come in who's kind of a cheapskate, and he comes in by himself to watch a movie matinee like me, versus a working man who brings his entire family into the theater at 7 o'clock at night and spends over $100, including popcorn and candy and whatnot. So the family-friendly films are making money not because they're attracting more decision makers. They're making more money because mom or dad brings the entire family, or one kid convinces the parents to bring the entire family. You see 9 people walk in, and they're all getting tickets and they're all getting concessions. But those are top grossing comedies, and they're not all animated. Most of them are animated, but what has the impact is parents know that they can bring it in, bring their kids in, even 2 and 3-year-old kids. It's not like the Black Cauldron, which I saw as a kid, and I was in the theater and I was terrified by it, and I think it was a mistake for Disney to put that out. It's so dark and it's so sinister that children were crying. Even kids my age were in the theater crying. The last one that I get asked about, and that I keep seeing posted on all the writers groups, is what about writer's block? I see 2, 3, 4, 5 posts a day. Someone has writer's block. And the opening pyramid I have on this video is Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And it's pretty simple and straightforward. At the top of the hierarchy, the things that we, well, actually, let me start at the bottom. At the bottom is, you have, of course, food, clothing, shelter, things that you absolutely have to have. Above that, you have your safety needs, security and safety, not fearing attack by wolves or the Death Star or something else terrible. Once you have those, you want to have belongingness and love needs, good relationships. Once you have those established, then you tend to want to have your esteem needs met, feelings of prestige and feeling of accomplishment. And finally, very few people actually reach this in life, self-fulfillment needs, achieving one's full potential, including their creative activities. When you get up to psychological needs and self-fulfillment needs, some people kind of jump around a little bit. But every single character, people usually write their stories about the main character. I think that's a mistake. If you're going to do anything feature length, especially anything over 22 minutes, it should be about multiple people. Each character is trying to get something on Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And when you get to the middle or end of Act 2, when you've got to up the stakes, and some people do this 2 or 3 times in a film, they'll up the stakes, and then they'll up the stakes again. You can make the big jump from somebody being artistically creative to suddenly being dropped into a survival situation. But I think that it's better if you're going to up the stakes, which you really have to do to make a movie interesting, somewhere toward the end of Act 2, is to move down Maslow's hierarchy of needs, go to, belongingness, jump straight to their safety needs, security or safety. There's a disaster coming up. And then finally, that person's immediate survival. And then you might even want to jump ahead even more and go straight to their whole family survival. And then you can up the stakes even more at the end. And now it's about the whole community's in danger from this flood or this disaster. But you've got up the stakes. Try to think of a movie you've ever seen where somewhere, around the 1 hour mark, hour and 10 minutes, hour and 20 minutes, at some point they up the stakes. Now more people are in danger. Sorry, throat's getting a little dry. So if you're looking for story ideas, remember that you're writing a new mini story every 7 to 10 minutes or every 7 to 10 pages. Outlines, I'm seeing a lot of stories on that, and I don't. Most writers I see don't use outlines, although write an outline after the fact. Much better strategy in my experience is to take any screenplay, any story, short story, long story, novel, saga, whatever, rework it 5 to 6 times. What's the ideal number? For me, it's 5 to 6 times. Some people only redo it once. I think second revision, you'll find a lot of mistakes. Third revision, you're still finding mistakes. But you're not just looking for mistakes. You're looking for content, structure, efficiency. You don't want to overtell something. And remember, dialogue you want to keep as short as possible. You want as little dialogue. You want each line to be simple. One line if you can get it. You don't want to go off on this whole crazy tangent. The way we talk when we're just kind of like hanging out, and this thing reminds me of this, and this reminds me of that. You don't ever want to have a story, have one person telling a story. This happened, and then that happened. And one has nothing to do with the other, and then that happened. And that reminds me of something completely different from what I started with. No, the story, the dialogue, it's always about one thing, just one idea, and be very compelling and very direct. I review a lot of stories. I mostly write things from scratch, but sometimes I'm reviewing other people's stories, and I get them, and nothing's happening. And you can see long stories that are literally just this happens, and then that happens, and then this happens. And I think that what's happening is people are sitting there and they get this amazing idea in their mind, and it's just something totally random, like the image of a flood or a balloon or a plane flying, and they get this idea and it makes them feel really good. Remember, the feeling of discovery is the greatest feeling that you feel in the human mind, the chemicals that are released inside your brain. And people get that and they say, wow, that's a really great feeling. Now I want to share it with everyone. All everyone else sees is a big balloon in the sky, or cities rolling around consuming other smaller cities. They see something going on in space, and they see this weird looking spaceship that it doesn't convey the same meaning. You get that imagery in your head. You want to share it with everyone. You want to share that sense of discovery, and they're not going to get that sense of discovery. What you're doing is teaching people a lesson. Here's the crisis. Could be a generic crisis. They're going to blow up the world with an asteroid. Who cares? Giant laser, whatever. Blow up a city. Nuclear bomb gets captured. Whatever. Some story. It's all about characterization. Here's the main character. Here are 2 characters. Here are 3. Here are 4. Die Hard. Great film. A dozen different people with agency, with decision-making ability. And they all handled, most of the characters are handling the same crisis. They're handling Hans and the German criminal cartel that's trying to steal the $640 million in bearer bonds, and then they're going to kill all the hostages, the quote-unquote terrorists. And they all handle it differently. The FBI handles it, Special Agent Johnson and Special Agent Johnson have the same idea, and they're very much, like-minded, no relation. And they handle the crisis one way. But almost everyone else, from John McClane, played by Bruce Willis, to his wife, to the cop, to every single character has a kind of a different way of wanting to address the crisis. But it's based on their personalities. It tells you about their personality. And what a story does instinctively at our core, I think what it's doing is it's saying, based on my experience as an older, wiser person, I remember back then when we had the attack of the cave bear, we tried to kill the cave bear, here's what we had to do. What we're really saying, what it really comes down to, the kernel of every story is, we're saying this personality is right for handling crises or for handling this type of crisis. So that's forced to choose either between 2 bad choices or among 3 bad choices, 4, 5, what have you. Or not a crisis, getting to choose between 2 different options. Remember Blue Crush, her dream, Aaron Bosworth's dream was to, she was going to become this tremendous surfer, but her friends see how good a surfer she was, so they drive her to keep doing it. And then she's offered something different. The NFL football player, guy with millions of dollars, good-looking guy, and he's suddenly really into her. And at first she's having to make the decision, do you go, what was Michelle Rodriguez's character said, go pro-ho and be professional football players thing on the side, or possibly get married. That possibility was out there. And then we have a few hints dropped during the course of the story that this guy has a history of doing that, of quote-unquote slumming with those regular women, which doesn't make the women in that bathroom scene very likable. All the plastic surgery they get to make themselves look better than everyone else, and at the same time, the inside they're not good people. But that's characterization also. And with Blue Crush, probably the best surfer story ever. Surfer movies are terrible, but this one actually had a story. She has some agency, and she's having to make a decision, and it's not a simple decision. They keep throwing curveballs in there. And surfing in Hawaii is dangerous, but it's the best surfing anywhere. But so many people get injured. Some people get killed doing it, and they make that clear in the story. And so she has 2 really good decisions, but a little bit of a curveball. Do you want to keep surfing and potentially, die on the reef, or who knows, get killed by a shark or something? These are all dangers of becoming, professional surfers. It's actually one of the most dangerous sports out there. Or do you want to marry this, or try and marry this professional football player? It's the fact that it's a decision, and her friends around her are giving her advice on which approach to go. Obviously, Michelle Rodriguez is saying, Who cares if it's dangerous? Become, top surfer. So that in a nutshell is what a story is about. It's a crisis. It's choose, and by the way, never do this. I've seen some bad movies. And I don't know why I paid money to see them. And it's either choose a really good decision or you're stuck with a horrible life and death decision, and it's the only way to survive is to get rich and famous and be really happy forever. It's either choose among 2 or 3 bad decisions or choose among 2 or 3 good decisions. It should never be you're forced into get rich quick. It should be you either 1 million or 300 million, and Brewster's Millions, choosing between 2 really good decisions, 2 great options, or do you want, Superman's faced with, does he destroy the missile going for New Jersey or does he destroy the missile going for California? It's one or the other. He can't do both. And those are 2 bad decisions. Those are 2 bad options that he has to choose from in Superman the movie, which is one of the things that makes the movie great, is that he and Lex Luthor and Lois Lane are making decisions. They have agency, and you can see how they respond to 2 good options or 2 bad options throughout the film. So that's what a story is. This video is 36 minutes. That's twice as long as what I'd intended to do. Maybe next time I'll try and break this all up into like 3 or 4 videos. But don't worry about the act structure. Just when you start a screenplay, just write Act 1, Act 2, Act 3. Put it all in the format, new act, and then just start those on different pages. And every time you come up with an idea, just ask yourself, here's this little mini story. Does it go in Act 1? Does it go in Act 2? Does it go in Act 3? You probably shouldn't know how the movie's going to end when you start writing it. Maybe somewhere towards the end of Act 2. But I find that everything you write after, once you figure out how your story's going to end, it gets predictable and it gets boring. And actually, Quentin Tarantino himself admitted that in an interview. When he starts writing a story, he doesn't know how it's going to end. And sometimes when he does know how it's going to end, he changes the ending. I just wrote a 16-page, I think this one went over, 16-page story about racial profiling. And I'm right at the point where the pullover happens, and does it turn into a fatal shooting or does he somehow get out of it? That's a tension builder. Can you build life and death tension for comedy? Probably not. I'd like to see it. I've never seen it. Comedy is sometimes used to relieve tension when a director's kind of pushed things just a little too far and you need to relieve some of the tension. A lot of times in movies, especially action movies, especially if you want to have a financially successful movie, you want to put enough comedy in there that people don't just feel really tense and fearful for 2 hours. That's not a good amount of time to feel that. You want to have the tension and the release. And the release is usually you blow up the Death Star and everybody survives. But Star Wars is a 2-hour movie. So I'm not going to say anything more than that. I think I've given folks enough. If you're hit with writer's block, look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and it just gives you story after subplot after subplot after subplot. One mini story after another after another after another. Leave comments if you guys have questions.